Smoke drifted through the ruined corridors of Station 9 like mist after a storm. The sound of metal groaning echoed in the distance, mixing with the faint hiss of fire suppression gas. Emergency lights flickered weakly, bathing the passageways in a pale red glow. The battle outside had ended hours ago, but the silence that followed was worse than the explosions. The once proud defense station, humanity's last stronghold in the sector, was now little more than a floating tomb. Among the twisted beams and shattered walls, a small team of Drelek medics moved carefully through the wreckage, searching for any sign of life. The Drelek were a reptilian species, tall and scaled, their armor scratched and burned. They had seen many wars, but never one like this. The Kothar swarm had come out of nowhere, devouring everything in their path, ships, stations, even moons. The Drelek had joined the humans in their desperate stand, believing that together they might stop the tide. Now as they searched through the ruins, even that hope was fading. One of the medics, Dr. Vrax, paused near a collapsed bulkhead. His scanning device gave a faint pulse. "There's something here," he said in his low, hissing voice. The others rushed over, pulling aside the debris. Beneath a pile of shattered steel and melted cables, they found a human, barely alive. His armor was scorched black, his helmet cracked, and his body twisted in a way that made the Drelek flinch. The nameplate on his chest was still visible, though dented and burned. It read Commander Ryan Holt. Vrax scanned him quickly, his yellow eyes narrowing. 17 fractures, he muttered. Multiple internal injuries. Severe trauma. He looked down at the human in disbelief. He should be dead, but the human wasn't dead. He stirred slightly, his breath shallow but steady. When the medics lifted the wreckage off him, he groaned, eyes fluttering open. His face was covered in soot and blood, yet when he saw the alien medics, he tried to speak. The words came out rough and broken, but the tone was steady. "Status of the fleet?" Vrax stared at him. "You should not be awake," he said. "You are badly injured. Rest." Ryan coughed, a weak laugh escaping his cracked lips. "Can't rest," he whispered. "Not yet." "The fleet? What happened?" "The fleet is gone," Vrax said quietly. "Destroyed. The Kothar swarm breached the defense line. The other human ships were lost. You are the only one we found alive." For a moment, silence filled the medbay. The lights above flickered again, casting long shadows across the room. Ryan closed his eyes, breathing heavily. He looked like he might pass out, but then, to the astonishment of everyone around him, he laughed again. A dry, rasping sound that somehow carried strength instead of despair. "Then I've got work to do," he said. Vrax took a step back, confused. "You cannot move. Your bones are shattered." Ryan reached slowly toward his arm console, his hand trembling but determined. "Doesn't matter," he said. "If the swarm's still out there, Earth is next. Someone has to warn them." The alien doctor shook his head. "Your body cannot endure another minute of movement. You will die." Ryan looked up at him then, his one good eye burning with fierce light. "If I don't do something, everyone dies. You think I'm worried about me?" There was something in that voice that made even the hardened Drelek fall silent. They had heard stories about humans. Their stubbornness, their strange courage, their ability to fight long after logic said they should fall. But hearing stories and seeing it in front of you were two very different things. This human's body was broken almost beyond repair, and yet he spoke like a man discussing the weather. Vrax hesitated before placing a steady hand on Ryan's shoulder. "Your people fight like no others," he said quietly. "But there is no victory left to claim. The swarm will come again. They always do." Ryan tried to sit up, pain flashing through his body like lightning. The medics rushed to stop him, but he pushed their hands away. "Not if we make them bleed for it," he growled. His voice was hoarse, but the fire in it was undeniable. "I need a comm link. I can still access the command systems if they're intact." "Even if they are," Vrax said. "The station's power grid is collapsing. You'll overload the remaining reactors if you try to reconnect." Ryan leaned back, catching his breath. "Then I guess we'll have to be careful." His lips twitched into a faint grin, the kind that said he already had a plan forming in his mind. The Drelek exchanged uneasy looks. To them, it made no sense. A dying man with 17 fractures thinking about tactics and reactor output instead of his own survival. But that was what humans did, they realized. They kept moving. Even broken, even beaten, they found a way. The medics carried Ryan to a chair and connected him to a portable life support rig. The machine hissed softly, pumping stabilizing fluids into his veins. His body trembled, but his mind stayed sharp. He stared at the cracked display of the medbay's control screen, watching the blinking icons that marked what was left of Station 9. The entire outer ring was gone. The hangars were destroyed. Power was barely holding in the central core. Most life signs were gone. Only a few Drelek and a handful of surviving human engineers remained. "Can we contact anyone?" he asked. "Signal range is limited," said one of the medics. The Kothar jammed the long-band transmissions. Ryan took a slow breath. "Then we make them listen another way." The aliens looked at him questioningly, but he said no more. He just stared at the display, his thoughts racing. His ribs ached with every breath, and the pain in his legs made him shake, but he didn't show it. His mind was already beyond pain. He was thinking about strategy, about sacrifice, about how to turn the impossible into possible. That was what he had always been good at. That was what humans had always been good at. As he worked, flashes of the battle returned to him. The swarm pouring out of hyperspace like a wave of black fire. The human fleet standing its ground until the very end. He remembered the screams on the comm, the sight of ships breaking apart one by one. He remembered giving the order to hold the line. He remembered the moment the Kothar breached the outer defense grid, the explosion that tore through the command deck, and the feeling of weightlessness before everything went dark. Now, sitting in the wreckage, he realized something. They hadn't lost yet. Not completely. As long as someone was still breathing, as long as one person could still fight, there was still a chance. Vrax watched him in silence, unsure whether to call it bravery or madness. To the Drelek, pain was sacred, something to be endured only when necessary. To humans, pain was a challenge, a wall to climb, a force to defy. Ryan was proof of that. His body might have been breaking apart, but his spirit was indestructible. Finally, Vrax spoke softly, almost with respect. "What will you do, Commander?" Ryan looked up at him, a faint smile playing on his cracked lips. "What I always do," he said. "Fight." Outside the shattered viewport, the stars shimmered cold and distant. The wreck of Station 9 drifted through the void, a silent monument to a battle lost but not yet forgotten. Inside that ruin, one man, broken in body but unbroken in will, was already planning how to turn defeat into something greater. The medics didn't understand it then, but they would later. They would remember the human who laughed in the face of pain, who saw the end coming and still stood up to meet it. They would remember his words, his defiance, and the look in his eyes when everything else was falling apart, because some beings fought for victory. But humans fought because they refused to stop. And as the dim lights flickered above him, Commander Ryan Holt, 17 bones shattered, every nerve screaming, gritted his teeth and whispered to no one in particular, "This isn't over." The dark void outside Station 9 burned with distant lights. The Kothar swarm was moving again. Billions of their ships drifted like living shadows, each one pulsing with faint green light from within. The swarm was more than a fleet. It was a single mind, cold and endless, built only to consume. Every world they reached was stripped bare, every city devoured until nothing remained but silence. And now that silence was coming for humanity's home. Inside the half-ruined Station 9, Commander Ryan Holt stood in the flickering light of the control deck, his body wrapped in a brace of steel and pain. The Drelek engineers had rebuilt what they could of his armor, turning it into a rough exoskeleton that allowed him to walk. Every step was agony, but he hid it behind a calm mask. His ribs still felt like fire. His left arm hung stiff from its mechanical support, but his voice when he spoke was steady. "How long until the swarm reaches us?" he asked. Captain Vrax, now helping him lead the survivors, glanced at the sensors. "Minutes," he said. "They have detected our signal. They are coming to finish us." Ryan's jaw tightened. He had known this moment would come, and he had been waiting for it. "Good," he said softly. "Let's make them pay for every inch." The Drelek crew exchanged uneasy glances. They had fought beside humans before, but they still didn't understand them. A Drelek would retreat, save what could be saved, and fight another day. But humans, they turned hopeless battles into something else entirely. They refused to die quietly. Ryan leaned over the central display table, where a holographic projection showed the station's broken systems. Power was failing across every deck. Life support was thin, and the reactors were dangerously unstable. "If we can link the 3 remaining cores together," he said, tracing a path across the glowing schematic. We can channel their energy into the main rail along the station spine. Vrax frowned, his crest twitching. That would turn the whole structure into a weapon, he said slowly. But it will burn the station from the inside. Ryan nodded. That's the idea. We're not leaving this place anyway. Might as well take them with us. The captain stared at him for a moment, then gave a quiet hiss that passed for a laugh among his kind. You humans make destruction sound poetic, he said. No, Ryan answered, eyes fixed on the screen. We make it useful. Together they worked quickly. The survivors, both human and Dralek, moved through the half-collapsed corridors to reroute power lines and fuse the broken conduits. Sparks burst around them as they dragged cables across the floor and sealed fractures with plasma welders. Every system they touched hummed with unstable energy. The deeper they went, the hotter the air became, and the station trembled under its own weight. Ryan pushed himself beyond reason, limping from section to section, giving orders through the pain. We have one chance, he kept saying. We hit them hard enough, they'll think twice before coming back. Some of the younger Dralek whispered that he was mad. Others said he was human, and that was worse and better at the same time. Outside, the swarm was closing in. Thousands of Kothar ships spread through the dark, their bodies like shells of bone and crystal. Glowing from within with cold green light, they moved as one, weaving through the debris field of shattered metal left from the last battle. From the command deck, Rian could see their approach, an endless sea of motionless stars suddenly shifting into formation. They're surrounding us, said Vrax quietly. They mean to erase the station completely. Ryan's lips curved in a faint smile. Let them try. He turned to the communications officer, a young Dralek named Sar who still bore burns on his scales. Open a broad transmission, Rian ordered. Sar hesitated. To whom? Ryan's eyes gleamed. To everyone who's listening. I want the swarm to hear me. The alien blinked but obeyed. A low hum filled the air as the channel opened. Ryan leaned toward the microphone, his voice rough but powerful. This is Commander Ryan Holt of Station 9, he said. To any human, any ally, any soul who can hear this, know that we are still fighting. The swarm thinks we're broken. They think we'll run. But we're not done yet. We're never done. He cut the channel, straightened, and gave a small nod. Now let's give them something to remember. The deck trembled as the first wave of Kothar fire hit. Bolts of plasma the size of buildings smashed into the outer hull, tearing apart what remained of the defense turrets. The station shuddered violently, alarms screaming. Panels burst in showers of sparks. Shields are down to 20%, shouted Sar. Now hold them, Ryan barked. Focus all remaining power to the spine rail. The lights dimmed as energy was drawn into the massive central cannon that ran the length of the station. The hum grew deeper, louder, until it filled the air like the roar of a beast waking from sleep. Outside, the swarm continued to advance, confident in their victory. And then the universe went white. The railgun fired, a single blinding beam of pure energy that ripped through space like a spear of sunlight. It struck the front ranks of the Kothar swarm, and entire clusters of ships vanished in a heartbeat. The shockwave tore through the nearest formations, throwing wreckage and green fire across the void. Even the stars seemed to tremble. Inside the station, the crew stared in awe as the sensors flared with impossible readings. We did it, one whispered. Rian didn't smile. He only said, again. Vrax turned toward him. We cannot. The reactors are unstable. Another shot will destroy us. Ryan's gaze stayed on the window where the surviving Kothar ships were already regrouping, twisting and folding space to reappear along the flanks. Then it's a good thing I don't plan on surviving, he said quietly. The next blast from the enemy tore through the lower decks, sending a shock through the entire structure. Fire blossomed in the corridors and the artificial gravity flickered. The command deck tilted slightly, and for a moment everyone thought the station would tear apart. They're boarding, shouted one of the engineers. Alarms blared as the swarm's living ships latched onto the hull and began to burrow through the metal like worms through flesh. Ryan grabbed a plasma rifle with his one good arm and turned toward the door. Seal the command deck, he ordered. Captain, get to the reactors and prepare manual override. Vrax hesitated. You intend to fire again? Yes, Rian said simply. And this time we'll make sure it counts. Vrax nodded once. The kind of nod soldiers share when they know they will not meet again. As Ryan limped through the wrecked hallways, The lights flickered over the bodies of fallen soldiers, human and Dralek side by side. He could hear the swarm coming through the walls, the chittering sound of their claws, the wet hiss of their breath. His mind was clear. Every step sent waves of pain through his broken bones, but he used it to stay awake, to stay angry. He reached the reactor chamber just as the swarm broke through the corridor behind him. He sealed the door, knowing it would not hold long, and moved to the control console. Sparks showered down from the ceiling as he pressed the manual override. The screens flickered, displaying warnings in red letters. Critical overload imminent. The entire station was now one heartbeat away from destruction. Brax's voice came through the comm, rough with static. "Commander, if you fire, there will be nothing left of us." Ryan's answer was calm. "There'll be nothing left of them either." He looked up at the glowing reactor core. The light painted his face bright against the dark. "We already lost this battle," he said softly. "Let's make sure we win the war." The swarm broke through the door then, dozens of insectoid forms spilling into the chamber. Their eyes glowed green, their bodies moving as one. Ryan raised his rifle and fired until it overheated, until the creatures were almost upon him. Then, with blood on his lips and fire in his eyes, he slammed the final command key. "Fire everything," he whispered. The world exploded into light. The reactors collapsed inward, feeding their energy into the railgun one final time. The beam that erupted from Station 9 was brighter than any sun, cutting through the center of the swarm and burning it to dust. For a heartbeat, the Kothar hive mind screamed across every frequency, then fell silent. The shockwave tore the station apart, scattering its remains across orbit. And in that final moment, Commander Rian Holt stood unflinching, a broken man holding his ground against the endless dark, as the light of his own weapon consumed him. When the light finally faded, the silence that followed was endless. The wreck of Station 9 no longer existed, only dust and fire drifting through the dark. The Kothar swarm, the monstrous force that had devoured entire systems, was gone too. The beam had cut through their core like the blade of a god, ripping the heart out of the hive mind that controlled them. The few surviving fragments of the swarm scattered into the void, mindless and lost. For the first time in years, the stars around that part of the galaxy were quiet. Hours passed before the Allied fleets arrived, drawn by the final energy surge from the destroyed station. What they found stunned them. There was no battle left to fight, no enemy waiting in ambush, only the broken remains of a space station turned to glowing debris. The Dralek ships approached carefully, scanning for life, though no one truly believed anyone could have survived the explosion. Then one of the scanners picked up a faint signal. It was weak, barely noticeable, a soft ping coming from a single escape pod drifting among the wreckage. A recovery team went out immediately. They expected to find a body. Instead, they found him. Commander Ryan Holt was still alive, though barely. His armor was melted and fused into his skin, his body broken beyond repair. The medics who opened the pod froze when they saw him. His face was pale and covered in burns, his breathing shallow, his pulse a whisper. The medical scanners began to beep rapidly, showing damage that no creature could survive. 17 fractures, 2 punctured lungs, a shattered spine, multiple organ failures. The Dralek doctor who examined him whispered in disbelief. He should not be alive. But when she leaned close, Ryan's eyes opened. They were unfocused, filled with pain and exhaustion, but still calm. His lips moved slightly, and she had to bend closer to hear him. "Did it work?" he asked. The doctor blinked, unsure if she had heard him right. "The swarm," he whispered again, barely audible. "Did it work?" She looked at the display, at the empty space where the Kothar fleet had been. "It worked," she said softly. "They are gone." For a moment, something like a smile touched his lips. "Good," he breathed. "Then we're not done yet." Then he passed out, and the doctors rushed to stabilize him, though none of them believed he would live long enough to see another sunrise. They took him aboard the Dralek flagship, surrounding him with the best healing machines their species had. For days he drifted between life and death, his body too damaged for even advanced medicine to fully repair. The Dralek watched in awe as he refused to die. His heartbeat would slow until it almost stopped, then start again as if by sheer will. The medics spoke about him in whispers. They called him the Shattered Commander, the human who had destroyed the swarm with a broken body and a burning soul. When the news reached the human colonies, the reaction was the same: shock, disbelief, then pride. Across every fleet, every outpost, every ship that had once been part of the Allied defense, People began to tell his story. They said that when all else failed, when every system fell and every hope was gone, one man had stood against the dark and said, "No farther." Ryan finally woke weeks later in the medical chamber of the flagship. The first thing he saw was the stars outside the window. For a long moment he simply stared at them, remembering. The pain was still there, a deep and constant ache that the machines couldn't take away, but he didn't mind. It reminded him that he was still alive. Frax was there too, standing near the bed. His scales were scarred, and one of his arms had been replaced with a metal limb, but his eyes were steady. When Ryan looked at him, the captain inclined his head in respect. "You did it," he said. "The swarm is gone. The galaxy is free for now." Ryan's voice was rough. "For now," he agreed. "They'll come again, or something like them will. It never ends." Brax gave a slow, toothy smile. "Then we'll be ready," he said. "Because of you." Ryan shook his head slightly. "Not because of me," he said. "Because of us. Humanity, Drelek, all of us together. We held the line. That's what matters." As the days passed, the story of Station 9 spread far beyond the Allied systems. The tale of the human who refused to fall became a legend among the stars. Soldiers whispered his name before battles. Engineers painted it on the sides of ships, and colonies held vigils beneath the night sky to honor those who had fought beside him. The Drelek built a memorial in orbit where the battle had taken place, a great ring of black metal floating in silence, engraved with the names of every soul lost in the fight. At the center of the ring, they placed a single stone of glowing blue crystal. It held the final energy trace from Station 9, the light that had destroyed the swarm. On the stone was written a simple message in both human and Drelek script. He broke 17 bones, but not his spirit. Years passed, and the galaxy slowly began to heal. The Kothar threat never returned. Trade routes reopened, colonies rebuilt, and the human fleet spread once again among the stars. But no one forgot the man who had turned a doomed station into a weapon of hope. Ryan Holt never fully recovered. His injuries left him weak, and he spent the rest of his life aboard a small medical vessel orbiting the memorial. He rarely spoke about the battle, though visitors came from across the systems to see him, to thank him, to hear his words, or simply to stand in the presence of the man who had defied death. When young soldiers asked him what gave him the strength to fight when his body was already broken, he would smile faintly and say, "Because someone had to." He never said more than that. He didn't need to. Everyone who heard those words understood. When he finally died, it was quiet and peaceful. The medics found him sitting near the viewport looking at the stars. His face was calm, and there was a hint of a smile on his lips. The moment the news spread, every ship in the Allied fleet dimmed its lights for 17 seconds, one for each bone he had broken in that last fight. The Drelek called it the Silence of 17, and it became a tradition that continued for generations. Every year on the anniversary of the Battle of Station 9, humans and Drelek across the galaxy would stop whatever they were doing, look to the stars, and remember. They remembered the fire, the sacrifice, and the will that refused to break. They remembered that courage wasn't the absence of fear or pain. It was the decision to fight anyway. And in the deep silence of space, the legend of Ryan Holt became more than a story. It became a promise that as long as there were humans among the stars, there would always be someone who would stand up when the darkness came again. Someone who would fight when all others fell. Someone who would turn their broken bones into weapons of light. The Drelek philosophers wrote songs about him, calling him the human who carried fire in his veins. The Avaran scholars named a star after him. And back on Earth, his homeworld, his name was carved into the wall of heroes at the Fleet Academy, so that every new pilot and soldier would see it and understand what it meant to be human. Because in the end, it was never about power or victory. It was about the spirit that refused to fade. The same spirit that had carried Ryan Holt through the last moments of Station 9. He had given everything, and in doing so reminded the galaxy of what humanity truly was. Fragile yet fierce, small yet unyielding, mortal yet impossible to defeat. The void might one day bring new enemies, new wars, new darkness, but whenever it did, the story of the shattered commander would light the way. And somewhere out there among the stars, where the ruins of Station 9 still glowed faintly in the dark, the echo of his final words seemed to linger, carried on the silent winds of space. This isn't over.